For more than 150 years, Canada lived beside a giant, not as a rival, not as a colony, but as a partner who slowly grew dependent. A single line, the 49th parallel, divided the map, but economics erased that line every single day. Cars crossed the border 5 to 7 times before being sold. Electricity flowed south while dollars flowed north. Defense radars watched the same skies. For decades, the world called this relationship the gold standard of cooperation. But in the 2020s, something broke. Tariffs returned, threats replaced trust, and suddenly Canadians began asking a question they had avoided for generations. What happens if the neighbor we built everything around turns unpredictable? What happens when three countries decide to trade as one? They don't just sign a treaty, they create a market so large that borders begin to blur. That was the promise of NAFTA, that is, North American Free Trade Agreement. When Canada, the United States, and Mexico came together in 1994, the agreement did something unprecedented. It stitched together three different economies, an industrial superpower, a resource-rich northern nation, and a fast-growing manufacturing base in the south, into one continental marketplace of nearly 500 million people. Was this just about trade, or was it about scale? The answer is clear. NAFTA didn't merely reduce tariffs, it expanded horizons. Canadian businesses no longer sold only to a domestic population smaller than California. They sold into the largest integrated consumer market on earth, stretching from the Arctic to central Mexico. So, did Canada benefit? Absolutely. Manufacturing didn't shrink, it specialized. Jobs didn't vanish, they multiplied across supply chains. Factories didn't close, they synchronized. A car assembled in Ontario would carry Mexican components, American electronics, and Canadian steel, crossing borders multiple times before reaching a buyer. NAFTA made that possible. It made efficiency king. But here is the question few asked at the time. When efficiency replaces resilience, what gets lost? At first, the gains were undeniable. Exports surged, middle-class jobs stabilized, entire regions of Canada grew around US demand. Energy flowed south, goods flowed north, capital flowed everywhere. Mexico's inclusion mattered more than many realized. It did not just add labor, it added scale. Suddenly, North America could compete with Europe and East Asia as a unified production zone. Canada wasn't just trading with the US, it was embedded in a tri-national engine. But engines have a dominant cylinder, and in NAFTA's case, that cylinder was the United States. As trade volumes grew, so did asymmetry. Canada sent the vast majority of its exports south. Mexico diversified faster. The US, with the massive domestic market, depended on no one in the same way. So while NAFTA created opportunity, it also created habit. Canada built pipelines pointing south, factories hugging the border, energy grids synchronized with the American demand. The question became unavoidable. What happens when the biggest partner decides the rules no longer suit them? Nowhere was trust deeper than in defense. In 1958, Canada and the US created NORAD, that is, North American Aerospace Defense Command, the only binational military command on Earth. Two countries, one airspace, one command structure. For decades, this was hailed as proof that borders didn't matter anymore. Canada relied on US early warning systems, US fighter jets, US missile defense intelligence, and in return, US relied on Canadian geography, Arctic skies, northern radar stations, strategic depth. It was cooperation without fear, or so it seemed. For decades, Canada assumed continuity. The relationship had survived wars, recessions, political swings. Defense cooperation through NORAD reinforced that trust. The skies were shared, threats were shared, decisions were shared. It felt permanent. But geopolitics has no memory, only interest. When Donald Trump called NAFTA a disaster, he wasn't speaking in diplomatic language. He was speaking in transactional terms. Trade surpluses were no longer partnerships. They were losses. Allies were no longer allies. They were competitors. Then came tariffs, steel, aluminium, autos. Canada, America's closest neighbor, was suddenly described as a national security threat. So what did that reveal? It revealed that dependence feels safe only until it is tested. When Trump's rhetoric expanded beyond trade, touching Arctic dominance, territorial influence, even casual annexation talk, Canada began to understand something deeper. Economic dependence eventually becomes a strategic vulnerability. Why did this moment hit Canada harder than Mexico? Because Canada had optimized too perfectly. Mexico had diversified manufacturing partners. Canada had optimized supply chains for one destination. Nearly all Canadian oil flowed to the US. Natural gas followed the same path. Hydropower lit American cities. Canada had resources but no alternative buyers. America did not just buy Canadian energy, it priced it. And that pricing power became leverage. So, when tariffs returned and trade threats escalated, the impact wasn't theoretical, it was immediate. Investments paused. Jobs felt fragile. Tourism collapsed as Canadians quietly chose to stay home rather than cross south. And something remarkable happened. Canadians, famously pragmatic, began talking about sovereignty in everyday conversation. No military sovereignty, economic sovereignty. Did Canada then abandon the US? No, that would be unrealistic and unnecessary. Instead, Canada asked a more mature question. How do you stay allied without being a dependent? The answer wasn't rupture, it was recalibration. Canada did not walk away from NAFTA's successor. It walked away from singular reliance. Trade diversification accelerated. Energy exports looked outward, not just southward. Ports mattered again. New markets mattered again. Even defense, once unquestioned, began to include conversation about balance, autonomy, and options. This wasn't anger, it was adaptation. So what is Canada doing now, and why does it matter? Canada is building a future where geography is an advantage, not a trap. A future where the US remains a partner, but not the only pillar. Where Mexico remains a manufacturing ally, but not the sole supply chain. Where trade agreements multiply instead of concentrate. NAFTA taught Canada how powerful integration could be. Trump taught Canada how dangerous over-integration can become. That lesson will shape the next 50 years. Canada's trade diversification is not a theoretical goal. It is a systematic, multi-layered push involving a network of 15 free trade agreements with 51 countries covering significant portions of the world economy, expansion into Europe and the Indo-Pacific markets with measurable export growth, negotiations and exploratory deals with regions like ASEAN, the UAE, Mercosur and the Philippines, government trade missions and export programs helping businesses connect globally, strategic engagement with China, the first major diplomatic visit in years as part of rebalancing and expansion efforts. And while the US remains Canada's biggest export destination, Canada's shifting export profile shows diversification is advancing, a key ingredient in reducing dependency and building resilience in a rapidly changing global economy. Is this the end of North American cooperation? No, it is the end of North American innocence. For decades, Canada believed geography guaranteed stability, NAFTA deepened prosperity, North ensured safety, the border felt invisible. But history does not reward dependence, it rewards resilience. Canada hasn't left the United States behind, but it has stopped building its future on a singular neighbor. The lesson is clear. Allies can change, markets can change hostile, and sovereignty means options. Beyond the 49th parallel, Canada is learning to stand, not alone, but not dependent either. Borders may be invisible to trucks and pipelines, but they matter deeply when power shifts. Canada isn't leaving the table, it is simply bringing more chairs.